Hello, everyone. I'd like to start off today's session with a land acknowledgement. The Can-Asian Arts Network recognizes and pays respects to the original people of this land. For time immemorial, Indigenous peoples have cared for and stewarded the lands known to many as Canada, so that each of us today can benefit from all the gifts the land provides. Out of respect for the rights of Indigenous peoples, it is our collective responsibility to critically interrogate colonial histories and their present-day implications. We therefore work from the perspective of honoring, protecting, and sustaining the land and the people who were first on this territory to move beyond acknowledgement and into the doing. Similarly, we recognize the impact of colonial history and structures on our own communities and of those of other people of color. We extend a hand in partnership to those who wish to move beyond allyship to become an accomplice in dismantling them. Hello, my name is Vicky Chow. I am here in a Treaty 7 territory in Mohkinstsis, Alberta, also known as Calgary, Alberta. And I'm a filmmaker and arts administrator.
Hi, everyone. My name is Sean C. I'm a father, artist, and community organizer, and also a consultant for the Can-Asian Arts Network. I'm based here in Amiskwaci, Waskahikan, Treaty 6 territory, Métis homeland. And yeah, I'm very grateful to be representing and helping as part of this project. Through funding support from Canada Council for the Arts and administrative support from Festival Access Asie, the Can-Asian Arts Network has created digital content to guide, mentor, inform, and educate equity-seeking artists, cultural workers, organizations, and festivals in Canada. This series of digital literacy workshops will cover a variety of topics on business administration and legal considerations, introduction to social media and digital marketing, and encourage ways to decolonize in the digital space. These workshops will be followed up by a series of community conversations and roundtable discussions with arts leaders to help us all learn from each other. Make sure to sign up at canasianarts.com to get links to all the online content. In today's workshop, we are so grateful to have Greg Pang, who offered generously to put together a pre-recorded presentation so that viewers can understand contracts better. Before we do hit play, I thought it would be great for Greg to introduce himself to our viewers, and after the presentation, we'll come back together for a few questions. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Sean. Thank you, Vicky. Great to be here. Hello, Can-Asian Arts Network. Very glad to have put together the pre-recorded workshop, as you mentioned there, Sean. Again, my name is Greg Pang, here representing in Treaty 6 as well, Edmonton. And I've been a lawyer for, just over I think 14 years or something like that. So, and much of that time practicing entertainment law. And I'm very humbled to be asked to participate in a Can-Asian Arts Network educational or whatever you call it. I'm probably one of the worst Asians or worst Chinese people that you'll run into. I can barely write my own name. It's my parents are very ashamed. Oh no, they're not that ashamed, but at least at that part is like, man, you write like a 5-year-old. I was like, yeah, I do. So anyway, I am one of those what they call just a little bit of self-deprecation here. I'm a CBC Canadian-born Chinese, but beyond that, I am a lawyer, like I said, and my main focus of my practice right now is with entertainment law, representing film and television producers. And I'm happy to dissect some of the ins and outs of contracts for you today.
Oh, we so appreciate just even some of that vulnerability you just shared in your introduction, because I think a lot of us as the Asian diaspora, different generations and connections to Canada, there's certainly so many different stigmas culturally. And so, by kind of recognizing and naming all our different positionalities, I think we're actively doing that work of like finding safe spaces within our cultural community. So appreciate that. And hope everyone watching, enjoys this presentation.
Hello, Can Asian Arts Network. My name is Gregory Pang, and I'm glad to be here with you today to talk about understanding contracts. Before we proceed, I do have to read you a disclaimer. I know it's the lawyer thing to do, but here goes. Nothing in this webinar, session, or whatever you want to call it, is legal advice. Rather, it is only legal information for educational purposes. No client-lawyer relationship is established between myself and you by merely attending this session or viewing it later on. The views expressed in this session are my own and do not reflect those of my employer. And with that out of the way, let's look at what we'll be doing today. We will be covering, or rather this will be broken up into three main parts. Part one, I'll talk about what makes a contract. What are the essential elements to forming a contract? And part two is a special interview that I will be doing with my associate Michelle Molyneux, who will bring her unique perspective as an actor, a producer, and also as a practicing lawyer. And the third part will look into tackling some of that pesky legalese in a contract. And now to our first topic, what makes a contract? And I thought that this would be a good place to start, because if we are going to be talking about contracts, we should probably have some kind of baseline to define the subject of what we're talking about. And that leads us to the elements of a binding contract, which is the ones that I assume that you are most interested in, not the non-binding ones. The three elements. First, you need an offer, you need acceptance, and you need consideration. Offer and acceptance are fairly straightforward. I offer to you to pay you money to commission a painting of my dog. You say, yes, that sounds good. I accept, so I will do it. So offer, acceptance. There you go. That's all it is. Consideration requires slightly more analysis, and it's buried in what I just mentioned there in that offer and acceptance, is that the consideration in a contract are the exchange of promises. There always has to be some kind of exchange of promises. The promise from you, this hypothetical painter, is that you will paint this painting of my dog. So that's the promise coming to me. And the promise to you, the return promise, is that I am promising to pay you the dollar amount that we agree to. So that's the consideration, that exchange of promises. You have offer, acceptance, consideration being the exchange of promises. Then you have the elements of a binding contract. Let's do a fun exercise here. This is a note that I had just handwritten when I was doing a webinar with a friend of mine, a lawyer in Toronto named Divya Shahani. Shout out to her. Fantastic entertainment lawyer. We did this right at the beginning of COVID, actually. So anyway, memories. In this note, dated May 7th, I wrote, I, Greg Pang, promise to send Divya Shahani $1,000 by e-transfer on May 8, 2020. Signed. I put my notary stamp there. I even put my other stamp, my commissioner stamp, Gregory Kong Pang, barrister and solicitor. My question to you, knowing the elements of the contract, of a binding contract, is this enforceable? And by enforceable, it means that if you can hypothetically take this to court and sue someone for it, for me here not paying the money, can a judge say, yes, this is an enforceable, this is a contract that is binding, there's consideration? I just gave away the answer. That's right. It is, the consideration is missing here. This is what they call a gratuitous promise. I am promising to give Divya $1,000, full stop. Where is the return promise? What is she promising me in return? There is none. So this is a gratuitous promise, and therefore it is not enforceable. The little kink in this is that there is you see that seal there. A notary seal, is this now a gratuitous promise signed under seal? We won't get into that. That's some law school, hypothetical contract law type of analysis or situation or fact pattern, whatever you want to call it. We won't get into that. In short, technically it could be enforceable if this can be proven that this is signed under seal, but let's not get to that. We'll now get to the next topic of why are contracts so hard to read? Why are they so hard to read? And this is why we're having this session today, because contracts are a problem, that you have to decipher it. It's like they're encoded or something like that. And unfortunately for people, contract lawyers like me, I have a job because they are written by lawyers. Just look at this part of this recital to a contract that was posted by Ken Adams, the great writer and contracts drafting professional lawyer from out of the United States. Fantastic gentleman. Again, Ken Adams, American lawyer who is I think the expert on contracts drafting. And here we have witness my hand and seal this 10th day of October in the year of our Lord 2023 and in the 223rd year of the sovereignty and independence of the United States of America. So this is why contracts can be so hard to read, because it's written by lawyers who like their flowery legalese language. Another example I want to give you here is taken from an older, at least a couple years old, this contract from the Salesforce website, from their EULA, or the Master Services Agreement. And here, well, EULA does not stand for Master Services. Okay, so EULA is, anyway, this is taken from the Master Services Agreement. I'll just read this and tell me if any of this makes sense to you as I read this. Unless otherwise provided in the applicable order form or documentation, A, purchase services and access to content are purchased as subscriptions for the term stated in the applicable order form or in the applicable online purchasing portal. B, subscriptions for the purchased services may be added during a subscription term at the same pricing as the underlying subscription pricing, prorated for the portion of that subscription term remaining at the time the subscriptions are added. And C, any added subscriptions will terminate on the same date as the underlying subscriptions. Customer agrees that its purchases are not contingent on the delivery of any future functionality or features or dependent on any oral or written public comments made by SFDC regarding future functionality or features. It's quite a mouthful. Again, written by lawyers, very technical, very packed in there. So that's why, unfortunately, contracts are so hard to read. Now, it doesn't have to be that way, but unfortunately it is. And as artists, you will be presented with sometimes very technical, dense contracts that might not be as hard to read as this paragraph that I just read to you, but nonetheless might not be the easiest read. But what we can do is look at a few key contractual provisions that might appear in a contract that you could be presented and say, hey, sign this, please. This is standard legalese. I want to help you understand, or at least demystify, some of those provisions so that you can read them with confidence, negotiate in confidence, and also know when to ask for help. But before we get to that, I have an interview for you. I have an interview with the lovely Michelle Molyneux, who is my associate at Red Frame Law. She is a lawyer, a performer, and a producer, a film producer. And she gives to us a perspective that I don't have as not being an artist, even though, I might have been labeled or categorized as artist a long time ago, but I was never really an artist, so I don't have any talents like you folks do. We'll get to that right after the break. And welcome back. Now for part 2 of our session today is an interview with Michelle Molyneux, who I mentioned is an actor, a producer, and a lawyer. I had a lot of fun with this interview in the whole 5 years that I've known, 5 years or so that I've known her. We haven't talked about these particular topics on how she views contracts differently as an actor first, and then a producer, and then now a practicing lawyer advising film and television clients. We also talk a little bit about whether reading your own contracts versus advising clients on contracts, negotiation in contracts, and she has some tips for you folks on approaching contracts as artists. So I give to you folks, Michelle Molyneux. And now we have Michelle Molyneux joining me rather. Michelle is a graduate of the University of Alberta's Faculty of Law with distinction in 2015 and is currently completing her Master of Laws, that's an LLM, from Osgoode Law School in York University. While Michelle is passionate about the law and legal studies, her lifelong passion is performing and bringing stories to life. A veteran in the film and entertainment industry, Michelle has worked as a film actor, voice artist, pop vocalist / performer, director of business affairs, and a movie of the week producer. She recognizes the importance of law as a tool for both helping people and making creation possible. Outside of her creative and legal work, Michelle volunteers for the Rapid Fire Theatre Society's board of directors, very cool, and serves as the board secretary. She dabbled in Toastmasters and co-hosted the Legal Cut Pro podcast along with myself. Michelle, welcome.
Thank you, Greg. I just want to say the only thing more awkward than having to write your own bio is having to listen to someone read it. Thank you for the introduction.
I completely agree with you. It's like, I don't want to hear about myself. Perfect. Well, thank you for doing this with me, Michelle. This is going to, hopefully this is going to be a lot of fun. I want to first ask you, you have, as I read, you have a very interesting journey from actor to producer to lawyer. And it's not like you've quit acting or that you've set aside the producer career. These are all things that you're currently a practicing lawyer, but you can do, and you will be doing acting gigs and doing producing as well. How has that journey been? Because you were an actor for quite some time, right? Or you have been acting for quite some time. So how has the journey been from going through actor, producer to lawyer?
It's been, it's been really fascinating. I guess seeing all of the different sides of production, and obviously from an actor's perspective, you have a certain understanding of how things work, and you kind of only see one side of things. So definitely getting on the producing side, it made me feel a lot better as an actor, actually, of when I don't get cast, because I realized that it's not that they hate me if I don't get a role. Like there are just so many other aspects to the industry that I just didn't really realize as just an actor or a creative in that capacity. So it's been interesting just to see like the industry is a much bigger machine, I guess, than I realized when I was first starting my career.
So it's because you're seeing the business side of things, right? And how the decisions get made. Does that sound about right?
I think so. Yeah. Because when I first started off as an actor, really you're only seeing, or you're mostly seeing, the creative side of things. But it is an industry, and the industry is about making money. So there are also all of these other business factors and so many factors that really aren't in control, or the actor doesn't have control over them. So it made me feel a lot better about taking rejection when it happens, of realizing, it may have nothing to do with my performance. Maybe it was just they needed someone with a different hair color, or, they wanted someone taller or shorter because they had already committed to, the lead actor who's a particular height, or all of these different factors that really have nothing to do with me and my creative abilities. So that was kind of, it sort of took a little bit of a weight off of my shoulders, just realizing this is an industry. And, you just create the best you can, and you hope for the opportunities, but not to be hard on yourself when they don't happen, because it's not a reflection of you and your abilities and the work you're putting in.
Huh. Well, that's really interesting. And how about as you rolled into the lawyer role, has that changed or Okay, because you've worked with lawyers before. I mean, with me as counsel on a couple of shows, and you on the producer side, has that adjusted or changed your perspective, or added anything to it, or colored it negatively, or anything like that?
Feel I guess having more of a peek onto the lawyer side makes me a little bit sad because it does take away from that creative aspect of it.
Hmm.
And that especially on the legal side, there's just so much business and so much law that plays into it. So it's taken away a little bit of the magic for me, I must say. But I'm glad that I still have the opportunity to create and keep a little bit of the magic going.
Is it because it's kind of you're getting looking more behind the curtain, or something like that, or like I'm just curious of what you mean by the magic.
I think it is. Yeah. Yeah. It is that peek kind of more beyond the curtain and the thinking of the what ifs and do things go wrong and all of those scenarios that are just so much beyond the scope of just the creative product.
Mm-hmm.
And realizing, I guess, how many business entities are involved with like financing and all of the legal terms that play into it and everything. It just it's interesting. It's this like much bigger layer that I realized existed when I was just being able to just focus on the creating. And I'm just like, hey, I'm here, I'm doing my scenes, I'm making this character. And I didn't realize there's this whole big macrocosm of law and financing bodies and so many more people involved in the process than I realized in the beginning.
Right. Now, on that note, contracts, probably nothing spoils things and is a killjoy than contracts and reading legal terms. So, and that's the main topic of our discussion today. Michelle, how many contracts have you signed as an artist? Or can you even give a very rough estimate how many contracts you've signed being an actor for your acting gigs and for other potentially other gigs that you've done as an artist?
I honestly can't really say because I think when I'm in the creative mindset, I just suppress the fact that I'm even signing paperwork. Either there are a lot of circumstances, especially starting out on indie films, when I probably should have been signing something, but I wasn't. So obviously I was entering into contracts with these productions, but we didn't have a formal written contract in those circumstances. And then a lot of other times when I'm in my actor mindset, I just, there's a paper to sign. Oh, sure, I'll sign it. Here you go. Let's move on. So I can't even say what I've signed and what I haven't signed as an actor.
I think that's completely normal too. Totally get it. And when you were in your producer roles, when you're reviewing, administering contracts, or whatever role you had dealing with contracts for production, what did you look for in those contracts as you in that kind of headspace, in that role?
I would say as a producer, I'm looking for, can I meet the obligations that I'm promising to somebody? So I'm always making sure to, I guess, definitely not include anything that I know I can't promise or deliver on. And also sometimes I might be looking to, I guess, get rid of extras that likely I am going to give to the crew or talent anyway, but just something that maybe in case of a situation where I can't deliver on that, I don't want to promise it in the contract. So I would say the contract is kind of going to be the bare terms of what's being promised. And then I'm hoping that I can give more in whatever ways that it might be. So say, for example, if it's a travel day, maybe as a producer, I'm like, I don't think I can afford to pay for my whole cast and crew to maybe get gas fees for the day. But potentially at the end of the day, we find out, hey, you know what, we've made some cost savings here and there. We'll be able to kick the cast and crew some gas money or that kind of a thing. So I would say in terms of a producer, I want to make sure that anything I'm going to promise that I can actually follow through on. And more so in terms of, as a producer, you are making commitments and promises to your investors. You're making it to banks. You're making all of these different entities and all of these different different pots of money that you have to be aware that you're not going to run out, say, before you can finish your post-production, or, you have other people down the line that you're going to have to pay. So you want to make sure that you're not going to promise too much at the beginning and then run out before the end.
That makes a lot of sense too. And now in your role as counsel to production, how does that, if at all, change the way you read, you look at contract and therefore advise your clients?
I would say as counsel, I am much more concerned to look for what could go wrong. Just trying to think of sort of every possible situation that may be very unlikely to happen, but I want to make sure that they're going to be protected if that weird, extreme, random, and as we saw with the COVID-19 pandemic, nobody thought that was going to happen. To sort of be prepared, because sometimes the weird situations happen. And again, you want to make sure that everybody in those circumstances can still come through and fulfill whatever they've promised or contracted to do, or that they have a kind of a safety valve that, a situation has come up, has arisen. And if you can't fill your obligations, then you do that safety valve to say, hey, it was COVID-19. I'm sorry, we can't fulfill this contract right now. So I'd say that's one of the things I'm really looking for. And I'm also looking at the language in the contract to make sure, is it broad enough to give my client the flexibility that they need? And is the wording narrow enough that it couldn't be interpreted in a way that's unfavorable to my client? So to make sure that the language is going to keep them as protected as possible in what they're trying to do.
Oh, and that's exactly right. I completely agree with you. Now, with your going back to our topic about reading contracts, when you sign contracts as an actor, you mentioned that you don't remember what you signed. Now, come today, I know that I don't, even as a lawyer practicing now over 10 years, I don't read all my own contracts. I really don't, right? Especially ones that I know I don't have any kind of leverage to negotiate. When I get a cell phone contract to sign, there's no way it even makes sense for me to read that. I mean, either I want the darn thing or I don't. I mean, it's just the relationship we have with telcos here in Canada. You just don't have a choice, really, right? So I just, whatever there. But then there are other contracts, just speaking on a personal level, that I will read. We had a renovator, for example, that it was for replacing our windows, and they gave this contract and said, this is our standard form contract, sign it. I looked at it, there were several massively problematic things about it, and they told me, or they didn't tell me, they were actually negotiating with my wife. They're saying, this is our standard form, you either take it or leave it, everyone signs it. I'm looking at this thing, I'm like, that's not good enough. This is majorly problematic, the way your contract is structured. They were extremely annoyed. I tried to tell them, look, in my full-time gig that I negotiate contracts with very big vendors for many hundreds of thousands, millions of dollars. And these are always negotiable because we have leverage. And I think we have leverage on you right now because I can just go to the next window installer and look at their contract instead. So that's just on a personal note, when I will review contract and when I will be hard on them because I know we have some kind of leverage. How about for yourself? In terms of reading your own contracts, what lessons do you have for our audience?
I would say, I totally agree with you, Greg. There are certain contracts when you just don't have the leverage, or the terms are something that's, say, set by someone's lawyer and they're probably not going to play around with them for you. So I would say one piece of advice I have is to just give it a glance. I would say there was one time when someone accidentally put a nudity rider into my paperwork. And I just happened to think, hey, I just want to scan through a little bit more than just looking at my sign here. And I'm like, whoa. I didn't agree to doing any nudity. What is going on? And so at least then we could address it. And I made sure that I'm not signing that agreement so that somehow if something happened, they couldn't, later decide to, some somehow like edit nudity onto me or
Right.
whatever it might be. So I would say that's one thing I think is really important as talent and as a creative is, maybe you don't need to read the nitty gritty and the standard terms portions, but just kind of give it a glance overall, just to make sure that there isn't something that either you're not promising or you're not willing or open to doing, and to make sure that the payment terms or whatever compensation you're receiving, credit, whatever it is that's important to you, make sure that those portions of the contract are correct and are what you want it to be saying.
Absolutely. And I think that's really good advice, because, it might be too onerous to sometimes read the full 6, 7, 8 pages, like line by line. But just to add to that, that if something doesn't make sense and it's something that kind of raises any alarm bells or gets your spidey senses tingling or anything like that, then seek legal advice, right?
Mhm.
Yes, us lawyers are expensive, but seek legal advice. And, that kind of reminds me of, what was that? The song, I remember seeing it in a beer commercial a long time ago as a little kid, The Gambler by Kenny Rogers, I think it is. Yeah. And, it's like the Gambler song, and the lyrics really, they kind of stick with me about contract negotiation. You got to, know when to know, how's it go? You've got to know when to hold them.
Know when to fold them.
Know when to walk away.
Know when to run.
That's awesome.
I don't know if I know the tune to that
that's,
one.
that's awesome. That's awesome.
Everyone's
And that's
ears
as
are
far as we
bleeding.
can go without crossing that fair dealing line. So we're just going to stop there. And we're, but to your audience members, don't do that. First, you might want to seek legal advice on relying on fair dealing. So just disclaimer there, okay? We're not telling you that that's necessarily okay, depending on how you use it and how much, et cetera, et cetera. So The Gambler, and know when to hold them, know when to fold them, and know when to walk away, know when to run, is I think very instructive on how to approach contract negotiation. Is that sometimes you just got to you got to walk away from a contract when it's like, what, I have no negotiating power there. This is not good for me, and I'm just going to walk away with this. From this, rather. Easier said than done, of course, because what are your alternatives? You might not have alternatives. You might really want this gig. You really want this, whatever that is being presented in front of you, right? And then, and sometimes you just gotta know when to hold them. You play your cards, right? You play your cards and you negotiate. You negotiate, and you know what your limit is. Negotiation, and then you know when to fold. You know when to concede certain points. So, and hopefully that goes in tandem with, if you think you need it, then getting legal advice for those kind of decisions.
Mhm.
Michelle, what has your favorite thing been about being a lawyer, about practicing as a lawyer?
Can I say 2 things?
Sure, go ahead.
Okay. I would say one of them is being able to help creatives, because the business aspect, as I've now learned, is really important, or equally as important as the creative component, especially if you want to be able to distribute or share whatever you're creating. You need money, you need distribution, all of those kinds of things. So it really feels good to be able to just genuinely help creatives so that they can spend more of their time creating, and they don't have to worry as much about the business part, because I am worrying about that for them. So that's been one of the really nice things. And the other thing is, I've really enjoyed being able to still kind of tangentially being a part of these amazing projects that our clients are creating. So I think it's really cool that if I am myself not the producer or the actor, it's still really cool to kind of be on the sidelines and watching these amazing things that the clients are creating.
That's fantastic. What about do you have a least favorite thing that you'd like to share?
I have this terrible boss.
I know, what a jerk, huh?
Terrible.
So demanding.
So demanding. I'm kidding. You are the best boss ever, Greg.
Michelle, I appreciate that.
I would say it might be the same thing that we say most people don't enjoy. Who does enjoy reading, these the terribly long contracts with small fonts that sometimes don't even seem like they're written in English. It's not my favorite pastime, but I'm definitely the more I'm learning about the law, I'm definitely growing an appreciation for the contracts. But yeah, I don't think anybody enjoys reading really long, boring contracts.
Nope. No, unless you're some kind of masochist, or maybe you have insomnia or something like that, and then you read a really long contract, it puts you to sleep right just like that.
Ooh, I'm gonna
Michelle.
try that next time.
Michelle Molyneux, for our last part here, I'd like to ask you, do you have a top tip or a couple tips that you have for artists relating to contracts?
Okay, gotta remember my list here. One of them, as I spoke about before, is definitely give your contracts at least a scan and make sure that the things that are most important to you are in there. That's very important. When you're signing the contract, as best as you can, try to keep a record for it, or a record of it. That's something I was terrible with, and sometimes still am with my personal contracts. But being able to have those stored somewhere, whether even it's just, you take a picture digitally, because sometimes when you're on a shoot, you're on a show, you might sign something quickly, you don't necessarily have a copy, and there might be something later that you're like, hey, wait a minute, I need to get out of that contract. How do I terminate that? How do I get out of it? I don't even know because I don't have a copy. Or if you're having to hold someone and saying, wait, you said you were going to pay me and you didn't pay me, so here's the contract. So having that proof can be really important. So make sure to store. To check my list here. Another one would be negotiating, is I guess back to the know when to hold them, know when to fold them. Know when you can push and when you can't. There was actually a really cool and probably one of the neatest shows that I've done in my career when I was first starting out. And there was somebody who was trying to negotiate really, really hard for me to get a whole bunch of wonderful things included. And I didn't find out until afterwards, but I guess I had almost lost the gig entirely, because they're like, who does this girl think she is? She's asking for all of these things. And thankfully, they'd kind of known my reputation in the industry and was like, we know she's going to do good work. We don't know where these requests are coming from. And I didn't lose the gig, but I almost lost like my favorite gig of my life because of that. So it's important to know, definitely important to push, get compensated, because often as artists, we get undercompensated. But to know when that line is of when, you're potentially, you could potentially lose the whole thing altogether. And also in that negotiating is get creative. We're creatives. So it's a great time to try and see, like, maybe the person can't pay you a huge amount or as much as you're wanting, but maybe there are other ways that they can compensate you. So maybe you could say, as an actor, a credit. Maybe argue that, your name should be higher up in the list, or you want a credit in the main titles. That's something easy that they can give you. You might be able to say, hey, could I get a profit share later on down the line? Like, I know you can't afford to pay me right now, but if this project is successful, maybe I can have a little piece of that down the line. And so there are lots of sort of different angles that you can negotiate on. And I would say the last piece of advice I have is maybe a little bit more controversial. I know that as artists, we don't want to work for exposure. Exposure does not feed us. But one thing I would say is sometimes it's worthwhile to work for the experience. So I find a lot of the things I did early on in my career, when maybe I wasn't necessarily getting paid, I met the people who now have become my peers, and now are the people who give me opportunities to do the really cool shows and the really cool gigs. I also honed and still hone my craft on things that maybe aren't paying me as much. So it's definitely that fine balance between definitely don't give your creative talents away for free. You've honed that, you've worked on that. So, be compensated, but also keep an open mind to when is an experience maybe going to benefit you, and consider to, weigh that against maybe getting paid a little bit less, because the experiences really are worth it. And also as a creative, if it's a really cool project that you really want to be a part of, sometimes that in and of itself is fulfilling. It does not feed you, but it can be very creatively fulfilling. So that would be, I think I don't know, 5 pieces of advice. I'm not sure.
5, yeah. Those are all great tips. Michelle, thank you very much. I truly appreciate you for everything you do, your great work as a lawyer for the firm, for this interview, and just for being just an excellent all-around person. So I appreciate you. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, Michelle Molyneux.
Thank you, Greg. And thanks, everybody. Good luck. Good luck in negotiating your contracts, and good luck in making a creative splash out there.
Excellent. Welcome back once again. I hope you enjoyed that interview. For our third and final segment, we're going to talk a little bit about tackling contract legalese. These are going to be some of the regularly occurring provisions that you'll see in contracts presented to you as artists and are expected to, of course, sign the contract. And with that, let's get to a lesson in contract wording from Homer Simpson. Yes, folks, Homer Simpson from The Simpsons, that cartoon. I'm not sure if any of you actually watch it, but it's a pretty funny episode. It's very old. The episode was called Dead Putting Society. It was released in 1990. It was from season 2, episode 6 of The Simpsons. I'm kind of betraying my age here. I watched this when it was first broadcast. In this episode, there's a competition between Homer Simpson's son, Bart, and Ned Flanders' son, who I forget what his name is. But the two sons are in this not putting competition, mini golf competition, mini putt competition. Did you know, by the way, that in the States, some Americans refer to mini putt or mini golf as putt-putt? I heard that on some kind of podcast, and I was like, what, really? Putt-putt? Okay, I guess that, we call it a toque, they call it a beaner, or whatever. Anyway, in this episode, there's this mini putt competition. And the fathers, Ned and Homer, want to make a wager make a wager for bragging rights, I suppose. More than bragging rights, really. And they reduce this to a contract. And in this contract, it states that, quote, the father of the boy who doesn't win has to mow the lawn in his wife's Sunday dress. I repeat, the father of the boy who doesn't win has to mow the lawn in his wife's Sunday dress. Spoilers. I don't think I really need to give a spoiler alert for a 33-year-old television episode. But spoilers, the two sons decide this is BS and we are not going to compete, and we're going to call it a tie or a draw or something like that. All right. So what happens in the end? Ned, Homer's neighbor, says, hey, that's great. Boys taught us all a lesson here. Let's put her there, buddy. Let's just walk away and have this as a lesson learned for all of us. And how Homer responds, and I have the lines here. What? Oh, no, he says, oh, you're going to renege on our bet here. And then Ned is like, what? Neither boy lost. Then Homer goes back to the written contract, and he quotes it, the father of the boy who doesn't win has to mow the lawn in his wife's Sunday dress. Then Ned says, but neither you have to do too. To which Homer replies, small price to see you humiliated. So what's the lesson here? Well, the lesson here is that they both had to mow the lawn in their wife's best Sunday dress. Is that contract wording matters. Again, the father of the boy who doesn't win, and neither boy won. Neither boy lost too. At first, the first draft, when they were drafting this, it was the father of the boy who loses, but then they didn't want to be so negative. So they redrafted and it says the father of the boy who doesn't win. And that's where Homer found not the loophole, but interpreted the contract strictly. Is that the father of the boy who doesn't win. And neither boy won because they called it a draw. And therefore, they both lost, and they both had to humiliate themselves by mowing the lawn in their respective wives' Sunday dresses. And welcome back. Now let's continue on demystifying contract clauses. First, so the lesson from that is clarity from the Homer Simpson lesson on contract reading. Clarity. You need clarity in the contract. What is it asking you to do? Or what are the consequences of this contract? Let's talk about what you have to read. Ideally, you should read the entire contract. Read every line, every sentence. Is this always realistic? Especially as, as busy people who you're presented with this business opportunity, looks great, sign it, right? It's not always realistic, but I can at least impress upon you to concentrate on a few key provisions. Like Michelle said, at least skim the contract and then zoom in on what I'm suggesting as some key provisions. And some of those key provisions are, one, and these might be terribly obvious, but know your obligations. What does the contract say that you have to do? Do you have to mow the lawn in your wife's best Sunday dress? If you are the parent of the boy who doesn't win, know your obligations. Is it clear what your obligations are? And then secondly, it's about money. I mean, one of the big reasons why we enter into contracts is because there's some that return consideration. Remember, we talked about offer acceptance consideration is to get paid. And you want clarity on how much you're getting paid and when you're getting paid, right? What triggers the payment and when? All right. So how much you're getting paid and what triggers that payment and when. And then third here is about other promises. Were there other promises made when you were striking the deal? And does that agree with what is written on the paper in front of you? Are you being promised some kind of attribution or credit in the film world? Are you getting some kind of back-end compensation? Are you royalties or other kinds of promises, other perks or anything like that from doing this job or entering into this contract that go beyond just being paid the money? Is that clear in the contract? And once again, know your obligations, know how much money you're getting paid and when, and about the other promises, the other things that you're supposed to get out of this contract. Are they all clear? As well, not just about what you get and what you have to do, is what the other side has to do. A lot of times, contracts are a little bit thin on what the company that's presenting you as the artist, as what they have to do for you. But if that's not in writing, then arguably, then they don't have to do it because it's not part of the contract. I say arguably, but anyway, we won't go there. So what are they supposed to do for you other than payment? Is there something else that they have to give to you under this contract that was promised to you when you were shaking hands? What else do they have to do? Is it clear in the contract? Once again, remembering Homer Simpson's lesson in reading contracts. Is this clear? Okay. And the ending of the contract. This is also very important as a key provision. When do your obligations end? Or are they infinite? You're supposed to do the commissioning, like my example earlier, commissioning a painting. That might be pretty obvious. Once you're done that painting, then your obligations come to an end. And that's what spelled out your obligation. Paint this painting of my dog. Delivered, satisfied customer, obligations end. But some services contract as artists are not so straightforward or not as clear cut like that. So you have to know, is there an end date? Or if there's not an end date, is it clear to you what brings an end to this contract so that you can be done with your obligations to this company, to this person, get your payment, and then be done with it? If it's not clearly defined, it could be problematic. Because then they could be asking for you more and more and say that you're still under obligation, you still have to do this under the contract. And if it's not clear, then, well, you don't want to end up married to a contract for which you don't want to be married to. All right. Now, let's get to some boilerplate clauses and stuff that can be very relevant to you as artists, especially one thing called rights clauses. And we'll get to that right after we take this break. Rights clauses. What are they taking from you? Or what are you giving them permission to do? Is that your understanding? And is that reflected in writing? Okay, and make sure that you don't just fall for the, oh, it's just standard legalese, just sign it. Okay, well, that's for everything. But especially with rights clauses. Moral rights. It is your right to waive your right of association, attribution, and your right of integrity. Not necessarily a bad thing, but make sure you understand what you are waiving and that agrees with everything else that you have negotiated with this or what has been promised to you in this contract. Representations and warranties. These are statements of fact. Make sure that those statements of facts are indeed true and that you can sign it. Otherwise, if they're not true, you could be in breach of it. And if it's backed up by an indemnity, essentially that you will compensate them if your statement of facts are not true, your representations and warranties are not true, well, you don't want that to become a problem for you. So make sure you read those carefully and that they are true and that you can, well, not swear by them. This is not an oath or an affidavit, but that you are comfortable with signing a contract that includes these representations and warranties. And then indemnifications, like I talked about, that this is the backup, usually the backup, that what if those representations and warranties are not true. And we come to the end, and we'll summarize the rest right after this. And welcome back for the final time today. Thank you for spending your time with me today to learn about contracts. I know it's not the sexiest topic, but hopefully you learn something about what it is that makes up a contract, the offer, acceptance, consideration, that you learn something from my interview with Michelle Molyneux, especially her perspective as well as an artist herself, and her tips for approaching contracts as an artist. And finally, perhaps the driest, most technical stuff, tackling legalese in the contract, some of those key provisions I pointed out that to look out for and to pay particular attention to, not so that you can become your own lawyer, but so that at least you, like I mentioned before, that this is demystified for you a little bit, that you understand it better than before, and that you know when you need to seek legal advice or assistance for your contract. Once again, thank you very much for spending your time with me today. Best of luck.
Well, thank you, Greg, for all the ideas you shared. We just wanted the opportunity to ask you a few follow-up questions to your presentation. So obviously, the first thing that is on everyone's minds when they think of lawyers is how intimidating it is to talk to a lawyer. So, for artists who are thinking of consulting a lawyer about contracts, what are some considerations on how to even approach one? And, what should they expect when they're trying to find a lawyer to represent them?
I say not all lawyers are a-holes, but a good portion of them are. So hopefully if you consult with a lawyer at some point, then you will not run into one of the a-hole lawyers. I'm just kidding mostly, but yeah, there are a-holes all over the place. But maybe the a-hole per capita for lawyers is a little bit higher. But what to expect when consulting? It really does depend. I mean, lawyer personalities, like you have this stereotype on TV that of this A-type personality, really intimidating, et cetera, et cetera. But as I've practiced for over a decade now, I've come to learn that lawyers come in all types. You have your quieter thinkers, you have your loud, boisterous ones, and they run the entire spectrum, right? So it's what I do recommend, though, is that when you do consult with a lawyer, whether it is for your arts project or something else, maybe something personal, is that you come with you come prepared, like you are going into any kind of business meeting. You don't want to essentially waste the lawyer's time, waste your time, and if you're being charged hourly, waste your money, right? So have the facts ready. Bring any documentation that would be relevant, or have it sent ahead of time by email or whatnot, and just be ready to just in plain language, just explain what your situation is and what you need help with.
Fantastic. And, on the topic of, getting charged hourly and stuff, and knowing that lawyers can be expensive, what can they expect when they first approach a lawyer? How does that, do you have to pay up front before you even meet with the lawyer? How does that sort of work out?
It really depends on the lawyer, the law firm, and what their billing model is. Most firms and most lawyers do offer a free 15-minute initial consultation, where it will be mainly a discussion on how, like, tell me your situation, and I'll let you know as a lawyer if I can help you, and then we'll come to an agreement, or maybe not come to an agreement, and maybe you're going to work towards, is this the right fit to work with each other? And for as the potential client to decide, is this the right lawyer for me, and vice versa. So usually those, again, are don't cost anything. Now, if you say, you know what, I have this intellectual property problem, and I need an hour of your time, then you're probably going to get ready to be charged. Say, okay, well, this is my hourly rate, and this is what we're going to do. And I can't even promise you, if I were in that situation, I can't even promise you if I'll actually give you the advice you need, because sometimes you have to go back and do a little research, or it's like, you give me a lot, but this is missing, and I can't give you an opinion with this piece of information missing because it's very critical. So it's, in the end, it just really depends on your situation, what you're asking for. But again, most firms do offer a free 15-minute consultation for the purposes of finding out if this is a good fit, and they might even give you a little bit of initial advice with that.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Well, no, go ahead.
In terms of like numbers to expect, I mean, I'm sure there's like a wide range, but what would be like an hourly rate for lawyers to charge, or for companies to charge?
That would depend as well, with the I mean, so many factors. Well, we'll start with, experience of the lawyer is one, right? So you have, let's say you can go down to your articling student, which might be in a city, and it might be different in a small town or a very small community. You might be looking at, I don't even know what the going rate is, maybe 200 something an hour or something like that for an articling student. So you're looking at your very green, not even lawyer yet, like student at law, right? But who is always supervised by a lawyer. And then at the opposite end, you have your big Bay Street, Toronto Bay Street, Seven Sisters firm. Those are, your I guess your biggest firms in Canada, which if you have your senior 30-year partner, you might be looking at somewhere over $1,000 an hour or something like that. And I might be even lowballing that. I don't know. So it's really, there's a wide range depending on several factors. Like I said, experience in geographic area, type of practice, even like sometimes the type of practice could be, maybe it's more competitive than others. So then hypothetically, it could be that there could be more price competition, price pressure downwards, who knows, right? So I can't really give you any statistical numbers on this thing, but I can only let you know some ranges here that you might expect.
Yeah, I just kind of taking a step back, I think it was I mean, I know you were joking about it can be potentially difficult or challenging to find a lawyer that really that you feel comfortable around. And I think that's particular, like not just within the law sector. I mean, I think there's much of that same kind of conversation across the board when we talk about our systems, especially with the cultural community. And as Can Asian Arts Network, we're here to support artists who do feel they aren't as well supported within the Canadian system for their art practice. What would your advice be in terms of, or is there even kind of those supports when thinking about having a lawyer with a cultural background to really understand like a situation better? Like, is that even important? Is that something people should be thinking about? Are those types of talks of DEI, diversity, equity, inclusion, part of like the law field in many of the ways that we see other systems?
I'd say it can be relevant. Like it's. I'm not sure if, in terms of if you have artists that are looking for lawyers in a specific field to help them with their project, who understand intellectual property, who understand their industry, you might be hard up in terms of, at least in certain parts of the country, like here in Edmonton in Alberta, it could be a little bit more difficult if like to find a kind of like that diversity of for cultural backgrounds for that. So maybe in larger centers like Toronto and Vancouver, you might be able to find nice, maybe a better cultural fit or whatever. But is it? But to your the other part of your question about is it relevant? It could be, but it depends on the subject matter. If the subject matter of your legal issue or your legal problem requires that cultural understanding, then of course it could be relevant, right? I can't think of anything off the top of my head right now that would, at least in my field. But well, no, there is, and I've worked with a lot of a good number of Indigenous producers and projects, and I don't have Indigenous background, but does that stop me from being able to understand? No, but would a lawyer with my same skill sets, but having that cultural background, would they be able to serve the client even better? Perhaps, right? Because there are some things that I just might, when I'm reviewing certain things, I might just not understand because I don't come from that, with that background. So it could be relevant there. I think it's even more relevant when you think of maybe other areas of laws, like maybe criminal law or family law or something like that, when understanding different cultural perspectives is important when you're talking about things like criminal matters or family disputes and stuff like that, right? So I don't know if I completely answer your question, but it's one of those things that I think I've given you 3 answers, very typical lawyer answers. 3 it depends. So I'm going to it depends this one as well.
Yeah, no, I think it does, because even when we say art, right, it's not just the mediums that could span different types of experience when we talk about intellectual property, but we're also talking about like what is the content of that. And so it's not like every single artist is talking about their cultural background necessarily, or so explicitly, but I think that kind of shows, even for the viewers out there, if you were to get into a situation where there's a lot of cultural nuance within the art that you're presenting, and it's creating some sort of challenge even explaining to your lawyer about some of these, like, let's say, Chinese diaspora issues, then perhaps like finding a Chinese lawyer that may have like a similar background as you would make that efficiency of understanding the situation a bit more efficient, right?
I agree with that. Generally, I agree with that. It lowers that barrier to be able to understand and lessens the chance of misunderstanding. And I think that's likely maybe the more the danger here is the misunderstanding. But you can mitigate for that by having lawyers who will listen and be able to make themselves understand, be able to ask their client the right questions, and maybe even do a little bit of background reading or something like that, right? So you can mitigate for that, but yes, generally yes, I think it could lower that barrier and better guard against misunderstanding.
Mhm.
That kind of led to my follow-up questions, like what you should look for, when you're approaching a lawyer to make sure that they can meet your needs, and kind of, having a lawyer who asks you the right questions and who does a little bit of background reading into your situation can definitely help as well, for sure. Mhm. Is there anything else that you would add to that in terms of, making sure, especially as an artist, to make sure that you are approaching the right lawyers that can understand sort of, your field of interest?
Yeah, it's tough because sometimes these are very niche areas, right? And that we could, as lawyers, if you like, let's say I have I part of my practice is copyright law by the very nature that I provide services to film and television producers. Copyright is an integral part of that. Now, does my understanding of copyright and reading case law and having studied it and way back in law school and having been practicing it for this long, would that necessarily though allow me to understand a legal situation regarding some kind of a photo or something that there's an issue or a dispute? Is it related? Yes, because is there copyright law underlying all of that, or assuming that that's part of the legal issue? Yes, but there might be other industry peculiarities, and depending on the situation, like we talk about cultural peculiarities that I'm just not familiar with, and I would be sometimes in that kind of situation, I might be hesitant to take that long. It's like, look, I do mainly film and television. I don't know the world of exhibition art or theater or something like that. I just don't know that world well enough, because I know that in film and TV, it's very peculiar, and you have at least here in Alberta, you have very few lawyers who actually practice in that area, because it is very niche, and it's not a huge industry in Alberta as well. So you don't have like entire firms like in Vancouver and Toronto who are dedicated to entertainment law and focused on the film and television industry, right? So it's one of those things that it can be difficult, and I don't know what tips to give for artists in terms of finding the right lawyer, because it can be difficult, because sometimes you can have in other examples, I know this one copyright lawyer does a lot with books and music, but dealing with film, even though it's the same, like a lot of it copyright law, right, underlying my stuff, underlying my area of practice with film and television, underlying his, I'm not touching his stuff with music. I just not, right? The stuff I touch with music is stuff we want to license to use in this film, and I know that stuff. But when we're talking about dealing with like studios and negotiating with other musicians to put together this this album or whatnot, and maybe dealing with Spotify for other things and all that stuff, I just don't know that, even though there's the same underlying law of copyright law. So it can be a little bit tricky there.
Mm-hmm. Thank you for that. Before getting into a lawyer, I feel like there are a lot of contract templates online. What are your feelings on those, and is it acceptable for an artist or people to just find a template and adapt it for your own contract?
You can, however, you run the risk that depending where you got that contract, where did you get it? For which jurisdiction was it drafted? Did it have in mind? Was it even put together by a lawyer, right? And even if so, does it take into account the nuances and the particulars of your situation, your industry, your particular matter? Is it appropriate for that? And it could be, right? It could be, or it could be just terrible. So it's one of those things. Another it depends answer. It depends, like, on those factors. And how would you know that? Well, you kind of don't. Some of these services, they could explain all those things, and it might be exactly what you need. But I just say it's like, just be forewarned that or it could go terribly bad. It might be okay. It's like, this is exactly what I need, sign it. And it could be great until it gets litigious. And if something gets litigious, then something's gone terribly wrong. But there's always, but the chances of it getting litigious is very small. Litigious, I mean, getting sued or you suing someone. It's like, all of a sudden it's like, oh God, this contract has quite a few holes in it. And I knew this was one of the worries I had, but I just used a template and it didn't address this interest of mine or this worry of mine. Geez, and I mean, this legal dispute is now going to cost me an extra $40,000 because it's not clear, or it didn't say the right thing or whatnot, right? So it's one of those things. It's kind of like, in imperfect analogy, kind of like insurance, right? So, like, yeah, you rarely make a claim, but when you do, you want it to be that you can be backed up, and you won't you won't lose the house, kind of thing, right? So or lose your house, kind of thing. So it's really just beware. Beware. It could work. I'm not necessarily advising to go for it, but I'm not necessarily advising a hard stop, no. But just beware of what you get in terms of online templates.
Great. And then, our membership contains artists who, might be recent immigrants who English is not their first language. So for artists whose first language isn't English and need support sort of understanding sort of legalese terms in other languages, what types of supports would you recommend for them to make sure that, they're not getting taken advantage of?
Oh, I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that. I'd say if like something like Chat GPT could evolve even further, then we can have AI providing a lot of those supports and translations and stuff like that for a very low cost. But I don't think that's quite ready for that kind of prime time yet. Although it's a pretty fun tool if you've had a chance to play with it. It's pretty damn cool. But I don't know. In terms of supports there. Like your local arts, like if there's some kind of local arts community, like in film, a resource like FAVA here in Edmonton, the Film and Video Arts Association of Alberta. I think Association of Alberta in Calgary for film again, the CSIF, the Calgary Society of Independent Filmmakers, all great resources. Now, in terms of, but more specifically to what you were asking there, Vicky, if English is not your first language, those kinds of supports, I don't know. I know, like at least for FAVA, it's a lot of the technical stuff, right? Lots of great gear you can rent there, and they have workshops and stuff like that. But in terms of helping you with contracts and something like that, I don't know if they have that kind of service. But I'd say and this is goes beyond any kind of legal advice, but look towards those communities, and hopefully you will have people there who are helpful and not just dismissive of like this new immigrant or whatever that's coming here. And hopefully you'll find that open arms kind of community and willing to help out newcomers to Canada, and you have that common language of the art already. So hopefully that immediately reduces that barrier, and be able to have that as a starting point to be able to I don't want to say integrate, but to seek the help that you need. At least have a starting point for that.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that, like, even like not necessarily having an answer is a good way for us to kind of check in on what is realistic for folks that are trying to think about contracts, but maybe do not have like the English supports to fully understand the system. And so, you know, when we kind of were thinking about this question, you know, one of the things that we wondered was, you know, does this also like bridge into the world of like social services? Because certainly there's immigration lawyers and there's like, you know, folks that are doing the work to help like, you know, immigrant communities understand certain legal systems. And so, yeah, it's kind of like, you know, kind of brings back even in this question about like, when you are working like bridging art and culture and language or different languages other than English, and or, you know, let's say Canadian-ish content, um, yeah, like what would the landscape within law kind of look like? So I appreciate that even you know, for someone like yourself to be very like honest, to be like, not sure, you know what I mean? Because there's no point in just being like, yeah, you're gonna be totally fine, you know what I mean? Because there certainly is a lot to kind of navigate. But yeah, just to kind of close off, I'm curious if there's any other kind of thoughts that you want to leave with our audience today.
Sure. I guess one thing that I'll say is about the recording. I do apologize that I did sing a couple of lines in there. So apologies for my horrible singing voice. Anytime I can get Michelle to sing, I'm very happy. So she's got great pipes. But yeah, I apologize for my singing voice there. But otherwise, I don't have anything else. I just hope that once again the recording about contracts helps at least demystify some contractual terms, and at the very least, you know how to recognize, if you don't maybe not decipher, but recognize and know when to seek help.
Great. Thank you so much, Greg, for joining us today. It's a pleasure to have you. We're grateful to have the support of Canada Council for the Arts and Festival Access AZ to making this Can-Asian Arts Network project possible. So if you are an Asian Canadian artist looking for more support, visibility, and community connections, we'd love to invite you to join the free network at www.canasianarts.com, and you can follow us also on our social media platforms as well. We hope this online workshop has been helpful for your artistic journey, and recognize, you know, there's much more to learn about contracts. So for more in-depth discussion, you can just log in to Can-Asian Arts Network to access our online groups, and you can go to Business Administration and Legal to see more information there. Great, we will see you online.
Thank you.